Grief has become overly legible, optimized, and SEO ready. Online, pain is passed into snackable content. A carousel of breakdowns, a reel of dysregulated days, a TikTok therapist's green-screened advice that flattens entire psychologies into viral 30-second clips. The brokenness is often real, but its function has shifted. What was once mourned privately is now publicly pitched. It feels almost like we are obsessed with performative vulnerability. On LinkedIn, founders talk about their mental health crises with the cadence of a pitch deck. On Instagram, influencers pivot from fashion to mental health advocacy after a breakup. On TikTok, young users share trauma stories with jump cuts and trending audio. The sincerity may be there, but sincerity and strategy are not mutually exclusive, and the algorithm likes pain. This new economy of suffering has its own logic. It rewards content that is raw, emotional, and personal, but in a way that is digestible, appealing, and scalable. The more you expose, the more you engage. The more you cry, the more they click. It's hard to find where the story ends and the business model begins. There is now a growing cadre of creators, influencers, and even founders whose central value proposition is pain. They're what I call grief entrepreneurs, people who turn personal trauma into professional capital. Their currency is sympathy, and their conversion funnel is emotional resonance, and their product is themselves. And this is not a new instinct. Memoirists have long done it. Joan Didion chronicled the loss of her husband and daughter. Viktor Frankl transmuted Auschwitz into a theory of meaning. But the current environment is different in two critical ways. First, the distribution is instantaneous and persistent. And second, the incentives are perverse. When Didion wrote The Year of Magical Thinking, she was crafting literature. When a LinkedIn post goes viral describing a founder's mental health crisis, it often ends with a soft CTA. DM me if you're going through this too. It's hard to critique this trend without sounding callous, but if we can't name the distortion of grief into a growth lever, we remain hostage to its logic. There is a genre of speech that has metastasized into our public discourse, a kind of pseudo-therapeutic, vaguely clinical language that wraps emotional statements in the veneer of psychological authority. It's the lingua franca of the trauma economy. Instead of "I felt hurt," we say "my boundaries were violated." Instead of "I was wrong," we say "I was experiencing a trigger response." Instead of asking "Are you okay?" we say "Do you have the capacity for this conversation?" And some of this is helpful, but much of it is not. It converts personal hardship into professional dialect. It reframes dysfunction as identity. It confuses healing with articulation. The problem is not that people are in pain. The problem is that pain, when algorithmically rewarded, becomes a kind of performance art, one that ironically disables the very healing it claims to seek. Because healing is not usually public, it's not usually monetizable, and it involves silence and boredom and unshareable progress. A culture that elevates trauma as signal rather than injury begins to fetishize it. Victimhood, when socially elevated, becomes a competitive field. The more marginalized, wounded, or oppressed your narrative, the more moral authority you can claim. The incentive structure changes. People start competing in the Olympics of oppression. Even Elon Musk claims to be oppressed. This is not to say that all pain is performative, but the structure of our modern society encourages a strange kind of arms race. If attention and sympathy are the prizes, who wouldn't be tempted to reach for them by highlighting their most painful experiences? We learn that the fastest way to matter is to suffer publicly, that the best way to be heard is to be harmed. And so pain becomes strategy. It's a zero-sum game played for narrative bandwidth. There is too much content, there are too many voices, there is too much noise, and so people lean into the only thing guaranteed to break through. The raw, the tragic, the disturbing. Social media rewards that extremity too. The more broken you are, the more complete your aesthetic. And if you're not broken enough, you can borrow the language of brokenness until it sounds believable. And so we get false narratives and embellished trauma and exaggerated victimhood. Not from everyone, not always, but enough to erode trust. And once trust goes, what's left? Just spectacle, just pain as pageantry. There is a danger when the commercial incentives lean toward constant disclosure. If the model requires new content, and the content is your sorrow, you are always looking for new sorrow. You are always excavating new wounds, and you are always in the performance of pain. And that creates a kind of identity trap. You begin to see yourself through the eyes of the algorithm, as a victim, as a survivor, as a brand of brokenness. So what happens when you begin to heal? Do you lose your audience? There is no easy answer to any of this. We've removed the distinctions between creator and consumer, between therapy and entertainment, between mourning and marketing. But perhaps we could start by asking a few questions. What do we owe our audiences? And what do we owe ourselves? And what are we doing when we post our pain? There are better models. Accounts that talk about healing without exhibitionism, founders who acknowledge struggle without harvesting it for leads, artists who transform grief into beauty, not bait. We shouldn't abandon the public discussion of pain or trauma. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But I think we should interrogate its incentives. When trauma becomes strategy, healing becomes impossible. And when victimhood becomes a currency, honesty becomes very expensive indeed. In Edgar Allan Poe's story, the House of Usher collapses into the Tarn, vanishing into the black water as its last living heir dies. It is a melodramatic image, but an apt one. A house built on grief, sustained by grief, and incapable of anything else cannot stand. It must fall. And so too with our current architecture of pain. It is unsustainable. It cannot nourish us. It does not lead to healing. It leads to performative disintegration. To grieve is human. To suffer is inevitable. To heal is possible. But to monetize grief as identity is to build a house with no foundation, and the algorithm does not care when it caves in.